Vanessa Cole had been a fixture in the legal world for years. A hard-nosed, no-nonsense woman who had risen from the trenches of a young, ambitious lawyer to one of the most respected judges in the city. People knew her, respected her, even feared her, but none of that mattered on the night it happened. She had just wrapped up a long day in court, her mind tired but satisfied with the victories and losses she had faced. As she drove down the quiet street back to her home, the flickering red and blue lights in the rearview mirror didn't make her stomach twist with worry like it would for most people. After all, she'd done nothing wrong. A traffic stop was just another part of the job. She'd pulled over without hesitation, rolled down her window, and prepared to get on with the routine exchange of license and registration. But then came the officer. Tall, burly, a buzz cut that barely hid the arrogance he carried. His badge gleamed in the light from the flashing lights, and as he approached her window, his eyes locked on hers. Cold, calculating. License and registration. He barked, no introduction, no pleasantries. Vanessa nodded, calm and collected, reaching into her purse. Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was stopped? The officer glanced at her ID, then back at her, his expression morphing from routine to something else suspicion. This car doesn't look like it belongs to you. Vanessa's brows furrowed. Excuse me. Step out of the vehicle, he commanded, his tone now sharp, harsh. Her heart skipped. What is going on here? Officer, this is my car. If you check the registration, you'll see. I said, step out of the car. He interrupted, his voice in order now, not a request. There was no reason, no logic. Vanessa had spent her whole career in law, defending the rights of people who had been wronged. But tonight, she was the one being wronged. And she knew, deep down, there was nothing she could do but comply. She opened the door slowly, stepping out. The officer snatched her ID again, looking it over as if searching for some crack in the veneer of who she was. His lips curled into a sneer. Vanessa Cole. Never heard of you. She straightened, her voice firm. I work in the courthouse. He scoffed. Yeah, as a clerk? She met his gaze, unflinching. As a judge. For a brief moment, he hesitated, then the smug arrogance crept back into his posture. He chuckled darkly. Right? And I'm the mayor. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Her stomach dropped. You can't be serious. I haven't done anything wrong. But Brad Miller's name now seared into her memory whilst listening. With a sudden force that shocked her, he twisted her arm behind her back, handcuffing her with unnecessary cruelty. You're under arrest for resisting a lawful order, he muttered, as if he'd just caught a criminal in the act. Vanessa's head spun as she was shoved into the squad car. Her body trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of the injustice. A black woman, a judge, wrongfully arrested by a man who saw her as nothing more than someone to push around. This was the world she lived in, the world she had spent her life fighting against. Inside the holding cell, the air was thick with the stench of sweat and neglect. Vanessa sat, hands now free but aching from how tightly they had been cuffed. It was a moment she never imagined would be hers. The courtroom had always been her domain. She'd fought for justice for so long, but now, she was the one on the other side of the bars. And then, the door opened. Brad Miller swaggered in, a sick grin spreading across his face as he saw her sitting there. Well, look who we have here, he mocked, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Never thought I'd be locking up a judge, especially one like you. You know, we have hygiene standards here. Can't have any infestations. Vanessa's jaw clenched. She knew what he was trying to do: humiliate her, break her. He turned to one of the female officers who stood nearby. Take her to processing, he ordered. The officer hesitated for just a moment, and Vanessa saw it, that flicker of doubt. But then the officer nodded, and they led Vanessa into a small room with a chair in the center, surrounded by clippers, scissors, and menacing tools. The buzz of the clippers filled the room as the officer positioned her in the chair. Vanessa refused to react, refused to let him have the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside, her mind screamed. This wasn't justice. This wasn't the law. The clippers buzzed to life, slicing through her hair. Each strand fell to the floor in clumps, and with each fall, a little piece of her dignity went with it. She kept her face unreadable, her emotions locked inside. The power she had always felt in the courtroom now felt so distant. The humiliation of it all was unbearable, but she refused to let it show. "Now you look how you should," Brad sneered, arms crossed, watching as the last remnants of her pride were shaved away. Vanessa stared at him, her silence louder than any words she could have said. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next morning, in the courthouse, Vanessa stood before her peers. Her body still ached from the indignity she had endured, but she stood tall. Her hands were free, but the orange jumpsuit and the freshly shaved head made her look less like a judge and more like a prisoner. As she walked to the defendant's podium, whispers spread across the room. Brad Miller stood across the room, still basking in his small victory. His smirk never faltered as he watched her walk in, thinking she was broken. But then, something changed. An older bailiff, one who had worked in the courthouse for decades, looked at her with wide eyes. He turned to the clerk, whispering something. The murmurs in the room grew louder. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. And then, the door to the judge's chambers opened, and everyone went silent, waiting for the presiding judge to enter. But it wasn't the presiding judge who walked through the door. It was Vanessa Cole, not as a prisoner, not as someone broken, but as the judge. She stepped behind the bench, adjusted the microphone, and took her rightful seat. Gasps filled the room. The atmosphere shifted. Brad Miller's jaw went slack. The same man who had stripped her of her dignity was now forced to watch as she reclaimed her place. The room stood still. Vanessa exhaled slowly, her gaze never leaving Brad. "Call the next case," she said, her voice firm and commanding. The prosecutor stood frozen. The bailiff cleared his throat, and, in a voice thick with awe, he said, "I'll rise for Judge Vanessa Cole." For the first time, the courtroom felt like it belonged to her. The officers who had once laughed at Brad's actions were now uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Vanessa's eyes didn't leave Brad. "Officer Brad Miller, we have unfinished business to address." Her words hit like a freight train. He had no excuses, no defense. He was nothing now but a man standing on the wrong side of the law. The investigation into the precinct's practices had been in the works for years, but with Brad's actions as blatant disregard for the law, it was time for the truth to come out. Vanessa ordered an independent review of all the precinct's arrest records and internal complaints under Brad Miller's watch. The federal agents entered the room, and with them, the evidence of years of corruption, racial profiling, and abuse of power. Brad's face turned pale as they read the charges against him. His smug attitude vanished. His power, his badge, everything he had spent years building was stripped away in moments. The room was dead silent as Vanessa delivered the final blow. "Officer Miller, you are placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. I'm recommending your immediate suspension without pay." Brad's protests fell on deaf ears. His world crumbled before him. The federal investigators moved in, taking his badge, his gun, his power. And in the end, they took his freedom. The fallout from his arrest sent shockwaves through the city. Vanessa used her platform to demand change. She led an investigation that exposed years of corruption and brutality within the precinct. Brad's trial was inevitable, the evidence against him overwhelming. And when the sentencing came, Vanessa was the judge. She presided over the trial that would send Brad Miller to prison. As she looked at him now in the same orange jumpsuit he had forced so many to wear, she struck the gavel. "You spent years abusing your power. Today, you answer for it." Brad Miller was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. As he was led away, his face was one of disbelief. Vanessa simply watched him go. Her work was done. Justice had been served. Before walking away from the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, eager for a statement. Vanessa paused, her voice steady and sure. "Racism has consequences," she said, before turning and walking away. And for the first time in her career, she believed it.